Which mysteries for the ages have finally been solved? The McStay family disappearance and murders. In February of 2010, the McStays, a family of 4, seemingly vanished from their home, abruptly. A carton of eggs was left open on the counter and the family dogs were still outside in the backyard. The scene was eerie and complicated because the home the McStays lived in was in the process of being renovated, so a neat and orderly home wasn't the norm at this stage. It appeared there was missing furniture and the usual mess that comes with construction, some freshly painted or redone surfaces mixed with older versions. From the outside, it appeared the family just took off. Neighbor had surveillance that captured what appeared to be the bottom of the family SUV leaving the driveway. Since they were living in California, the border to Mexico wasn't far, and authorities found footage of what appeared to be the McStays walking into Mexico with their 2 little boys in tow. The family SUV was found abandoned in a mall parking lot near the Mexico border. 3 years passed before the bodies of the McStays were found buried in shallow graves in the California desert. The bodies appeared to be in advanced decomposition and there were signs of blunt force trauma. A sledgehammer was also found buried with one of the bodies. Chase Merritt, a business partner to Joseph McStay, was arrested and charged with their murders in November 11, 2014. His trial was delayed for years until 2019. He was sentenced to death. Motive? Chase had a gambling addiction and had been and continued embezzling money from the business. His DNA was found in the McStays' abandoned vehicle. He bludgeoned his business partner and their family to death for money. The disappearance of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, author of The Little Prince, who was also a French reconnaissance pilot during World War II. In 1944, he took off on a reconnaissance mission from Corsica and never made it back, and there was never any evidence of what might have happened to him and his plane. Finally, in 1998, a French fisherman pulled up his net and found wrapped in it a silver bracelet engraved with Saint-Exupéry's name, and in 2004 a diver searched in the area and found the remains of his plane, which had apparently been shot down by a German fighter after all. Not exactly solved as there's no 100% confirmation, but the whole "what's the main buyer of glitter" craze from a while back. Turns out it's highly likely, basically confirmed in my opinion, that it's boat paint. Just boat paint. To clarify, there's an article I read about a bunch of guys trying to get to the bottom of this by talking to people related to the industry. One person explained that when he worked at a boat paint company, forgot the exact wording, they went through around 10 30-gallon barrels a week, and that's just one company. He also explained that most other companies he knew basically brought from Glitterex too. That is both an ending I didn't expect and far more tame than I'd hoped, although I don't know what I was hoping for. Some sort of gigantic glitter-faceted underground civilization or a particular body paint kink that half of the world was keeping secret from the rest of us maybe. Adventures with Purpose, a great YouTube channel where a group of divers find missing people underwater after years when the local authorities don't care anymore or just don't have the resources. There once was an urban legend or conspiracy theory about a video game called Polybius. The story goes as such. A mysterious arcade cabinet appeared in Portland, Oregon in 1981, with never-before-seen gameplay. It was captivating to the point of addicting, but that's not all. Many who played the game fell sick or went mad. Some versions of the myth detail that it caused hallucinations and nightmares or drove players to take their own lives. Every version of the urban legend mentioned mysterious men in black, who would check on the game every now and again, leading some to believe that this was some kind of government psyop to make people go insane. Several times over the years, it was proven to have not existed, usually by pointing to a lack of contemporary media coverage or an FOIA request that found no records of such a video game. But this left people unsatisfied. If it truly were a psyop, of course these channels would come up blank. It wasn't until a retro gaming YouTuber and journalist called Ahoy, who's a god-tier YouTuber by the way, made a video detailing his investigations. He not only proved it to be false, he found the exact person, place, time, and purpose for which the rumor was created. Honestly, it's one of my favorite watches on YouTube and possibly my favorite documentary ever made. This guy's investigation is captivating and goes into an insane amount of detail. The Windsor Hum. Residents of Windsor, Canada, have been saying they could hear a hum coming from across the river in Detroit for the better part of a few decades. Well, it turns out that when a steel producer turned their furnaces off recently, when they closed up shop, the hum stopped. People had no idea what the noise could be until the factory closed. Also, a little fun fact, Zug Island, where the factory was located, was mentioned in RoboCop and was also the destination of SS Edmund Fitzgerald before it sank. Devil's Kettle Falls. A stream separates into two sections. One continues normally, the other spirals deep into a hole. All sorts of things were thrown down into the hole in an effort to discover where the water went. Ping pong balls, various dyes. It was even rumored that someone stuck an old car down there. Eventually, someone came up with a clever idea. They measured the total water flow above and below the falls and discovered they were similar enough to deduce the two streams joined back up relatively quickly. Q Lazarus, who recorded the haunting Goodbye Horses that was later included in the soundtrack for Silence of the Lambs, was a mystery for many years. It turns out she recorded exactly 2 singles, retired from music, and is now a bus driver. Forrest Fenn's hidden treasure chest that he buried years ago and left clues to where to find its location. It was found within the last 2 years, I think. Its value has been estimated as high as $2 million, depending on the appraisal of the items. The case of Adrienne Shelley, screenwriter for Waitress. Husband came home to find her hanging in their shower. It was ruled that she had taken her own life. The husband insists she was happy and would never have done that, promoting another view of the crime scene, where they found a shoe print that matched a construction worker in the building. Sure enough, the construction worker went to rob her and he thought he killed her, so he staged a scene to make it look like she ended things herself. And then the hanging ended up being the actual thing that killed her. The Erebus and the Terror were found a few years ago. The 2 ships were part of an Arctic expedition and disappeared 150 years ago. They had a whole section of the Museum of History in Ottawa for it a few years ago, with some remnants of the ship. It was very interesting. One thing that struck me was for years, the local indigenous population talked about those crazy white guys trying and failing to sail through the Northwest Passage, and ended up resorting to cannibalism in an attempt to survive. Their stories were ignored for decades, but what do you know, the oral histories ended up being an important part of finding the wreckage, and they found cut marks and evidence of cannibalism on some of the bodies found on King William Island. In 1997, a really weird and loud noise was detected underwater, and everyone was all, "What the frick was that?" In 2012, it was determined it was an iceberg breaking and/or rubbing against the seabed. The Sailing Stones of Death Valley. Rocks would magically move up 1,500 feet in the desert. Turns out it gets cold and freezes the ground overnight, and the rocks would get pushed by the ice sheets that melted under the wind. I would probably have assumed it was just very bored and very dedicated pranksters working through the generations, and somehow this amazing scientific phenomenon is kind of disappointing. Benjamin Kyle, man found beaten behind a Burger King with severe amnesia. It was a fascinating mystery until it was solved, then it was kind of sad. He had made TV appearances, had a couple of AMAs on Reddit, but no one could identify him. When his identity was discovered, William Burgess Powell, there was still a gap of 20 years in his life from 1984 to 2004. There's no record he had done anything. He had distanced himself from his family and had no friends, which is why no one recognized or identified him from his TV appearances. When he was saying his name was Benjamin Kyle, it was actually Benjamin. He was actually pretty certain that his name was spelled with 2 A's. How he came to that conclusion when his name is nothing like that is still a bit of a mystery. 1947. A British South American Airways aircraft named Stardust disappeared. Its last message was simply, "Stendeck. Severe turbulence encountered, now descending." After an exhausting search, no trace of the aircraft was found. For years, conspiracy theories and talk of alien abduction by wackos circulated. Until 1998, when mountain climbers on a remote mountain found an engine, pieces of metal, and clothing at the bottom of a glacier on the side of Mount Tupungato. Turns out the aircraft got caught flying the wrong way in the jet stream while it was flying at night and used a system of timing when to start their descent. Being in the jet stream reduced their airspeed in relation to the Earth and they smacked themselves into the side of a mountain, after which an avalanche covered the wreckage. The wreckage took decades to flow down the sides of the mountain with the glaciers. The glacier preserved the wreck so well that 50 years later, the recovery team found identifiable remains, personal items, and could read serial numbers on the engines. Amazingly, one of the landing gear tires was still inflated, and teams continued to visit the site periodically as more of the aircraft, cargo, and remains of passengers are still emerging from the ice. While it doesn't give us who the Zodiac Killer is, just recently his most famous 340 cipher was solved after 51 years. According to Oranshak and the team, the message reads, "I hope you're having lots of fun in trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show, which brings up a point about me. I'm not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner, because I now have enough slaves to work for me where everyone else has nothing when they reach paradise. So they're afraid of death. I'm not afraid, because I know that my new life is life, will be an easy one in paradise, death. Dan Rather was attacked and beaten on a New York street by two men who kept demanding, "What's the frequency, Kenneth?" He was rescued by a doorman, and the two guys got away. For years, no one knew who they were. Then a man invaded NBC studios and killed a stagehand. When captured, he explained that the networks were beaming radio messages into his head. He wanted to know the frequency they were using so he could jam the signals. Dan Rather was shown a mugshot and positively identified his attacker. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. Another science mystery. Back in the 1800s, evolution theorists had predicted the age of the Earth to be several milliard years, since this would have been necessary for the current life forms to have evolved. But Kelvin, the #1 superstar of physics at the time, had used thermodynamics to calculate the age of the Earth based on the temperature of its insides, and he said it was quite a bit younger. This was a mystery for many years and was considered one of the major flaws of then-current evolution theory. It was not until the early 1900s they found the answer. Radioactivity. Decays of uranium and other radioactive elements are heating up the Earth, so the cooling takes longer than expected. The biologists were right all along, but when the scientists who made the discovery were about to present their findings, who's sitting at the back of the lecture room? It's Kelvin! Now an old man, he's still alive and has come to watch their presentation. They were terrified at the idea of having to stand in front of the Lord of Physics himself and basically explain why he was wrong, but to their great relief, he immediately fell asleep. I think about this when I myself fall asleep in physics class. It happens to the best of us. What Deinocheirus looks like. When I was a kid in the 80s, all that was known were the bones of the arms with enormous claws. Hence, its name, Terrible Hand. They were mostly shown grasping a small car because they were so freaking huge. The rest of the animal was a complete mystery. Was it like a giant Allosaurus? One that'd make the T-Rex look like a puppy in comparison? A few years later, it seemed more likely to be ostrich-like and omnivore. Either way, given how rare it is for fossils to form at all, I was convinced I'd die never knowing what this dinosaur actually looked like. Then, surprisingly, in 2014, they found more bones, and it was just the weirdest thing. This one is strange. A guy is out drinking with friends late at night and leaves. He starts wandering the streets, and a CCTV sees him enter a cul-de-sac. Then he's never seen again. Some think there's foul play, since an accidental death would at least result in a body. But then family and friends reveal that he had a very strange habit of falling asleep in garbage bins when he was drunk. A few hours after he entered the cul-de-sac, the garbage truck came and picked up the bins. Later, after looking at the logs, it turns out that one bin weighed several hundred pounds more than it should have. But that was only recognized after it was too late. Damn. So the guy probably suffocated on trash while drunk or got crushed. Britt here. I seem to remember the police realizing quite early that he was most likely in the dumpster. They searched the landfill for months and unfortunately were not able to recover his body. What a way to go. I mean, is that a Darwin Award? I think for that to qualify, you have to go apply an exotic but ill-advised method to solve a different problem. And what this guy did was just a strange drunken habit. Sad, although you have to wonder how often he was getting plastered for this to be a trademark thing that he did. Mark Felt was DT, the key source for the journalist that pursued the Watergate story. Met him once in the 80s. He was a connection through a business associate of my father's. When it came out that Mr. Felt was DT, my dad called me to remind me of the dinner that we'd had when I was a kid. I don't remember much other than the intimidating vibe. The type of guy who, even as an 8-year-old, I didn't need to be told to mind my manners around. I just did that because he was scary, and his wife wore a hat with a fake bird in it. So in the early 2000s, someone posted new wave music that had been initially recorded off a German radio station on cassette around 1985. It contained about a minute of a song that became known as Stay, the second time around, that no one seemed to be able to find any more information about. This became a pretty famous earworm internet mystery until 2013 when folks on Reddit discovered the actual song and artist. It turned out it was a song by the Swedish artist Johan Lindell titled Up on the Roof, that never became any kind of hit up until that time, and had never been re-released after the original analog release. El Dorado, or the Lost City of Gold, turned out to be a mistranslation. It was just the name of some guy that got mistranslated to the name of a city. Sounds like exactly what someone who's on the trail would say. The trail that we blaze! They heard stories of a Muisca ritual where their leader would be covered in gold dust and then jump into a lake to sacrifice the gold to the gods. The Spanish called him Golden Man, El Dorado. Eventually, they believed the name referred to a city, not a person. The murders of Jay Cook and Tanya von Keulenborg. A couple from Victoria, BC went on a short trip to Washington state in 1987 and were murdered. It remained unsolved until 2018 when a genetic match on the DNA found on Tanya was found. The story was of interest to me as I live in Victoria and remembered the story on the news when the murder happened when I was a young kid. Between 2010 and 2015, I actually worked with her younger brother. He grew up and became a lawyer. Very nice guy, and I was so happy for him when they announced it was solved. The Andreen McDonald case. She and her husband Andre, yes, Andreen and Andre, originally were from Jamaica. They moved up to my town in Texas where Andre was Air Force and Andreen was a bodybuilding business owner. Andre was pretty jealous that Andreen was more successful and was constantly begging and demanding that she make him co-owner of her company. She always said no. One day he'd had it and did away with her. The gym that she frequented every single morning got concerned when she stopped showing up. She was very close with the ladies she worked out with and even gave them a key to her house. She told them that if she ever went missing, that her husband probably did it, and they knew he had an attitude. So one day, while Andre was out, the ladies went to check on Andreen. Her car was there, her wallet was there, but she wasn't. They found blood and hair in her bathroom. That's when the cops were called. Cops showed up when Andre was home and asked about Andreen. He said she was in the hospital. They asked him, if she's in hospital, how come her wallet's here? He responded simply, talk to my lawyer. They got a warrant and were able to search the house further, saw more leftover evidence in the bathroom and evidence of clothes had been found burned in the fire pit in the backyard. But no body. So all they could do was charge him with a missing persons deal. Andre was super snarky about it too. How he'd be proven innocent, how the cops would never catch on. Little did he realize how loved Andreen was, and how much Texas ranchers hate corrupt and snarky murderers. Crowds gathered daily and were given permission to sweep over the rancher's land for any sign of Andreen's body. Just as the crowds started feeling defeated and Andre started to see hope of being released, a rancher was scoping his field. He had heard coyotes out and went to see what could have enticed them. Surely enough, he found human bones, later identified as Andreen. So yeah, proper charges were able to be filed. So some ask why she stayed or why he felt jealous that she was more successful. Remember, they're from Jamaica. The whole point of coming here was to better themselves and bring pride to their families. So she was doing great, but because she was doing so good, his family was kind of looking down on him because his wife was better and more successful than him. Then she stayed with him, mainly because she wanted to try and make sure their daughter's life could be as normal as possible. Sucks that it kind of backfired for her, but now she's being taken care of by her aunt and grandma, who both love and support her. What a grim story. Not that I ever intend to murder anyone, but doing it and then staying put and complacent in a community full of people who suspect you doesn't seem like the smartest move. In the 1970s, a number of Japanese citizens disappeared from coastal areas in Japan. After many years, it was found out that North Korea had abducted them. Most of the missing were in their 20s. The youngest, Megumu Yukata, was 13 when she disappeared in November 1977 from the Japanese west coast city of Niigata. In case anyone else is interested, also go look up the time that Kim Jong-il kidnapped a South Korean director and his actress wife, as well as the special effects team behind Godzilla, in order to make his own monster movie, Pulgasari. Where is the Titanic? Most people don't realize that half of the people in the world grew up when the ship's location was still a complete mystery. Now, it's old news. Memories of Murder, a movie based on a true story about South Korea's first serial murderer. A confession was made in 2019 after more than 30 years. He was already in jail for doing the unspeakable act and killing his sister-in-law. Go check the movie, it's a masterpiece. What's the purpose of the appendix, really? Apparently we now know it keeps your good bacteria safe. Well, my appendix tried to kill me. 100 years ago, Viking bones from one of the most important grave finds in Denmark disappeared from the Museum of National History. They were found last week in a box, seemingly misplaced among elements from a different find. Gides and the Land of Tar. A few years ago, 2017, comedian Nate Fernald posted a tweet of an enamel pin he had bought of a familiar-looking friendly monster with the word Gides written underneath it. He was unable to find any information on what Gides is, and the mystery took the internet by storm. The mystery kept growing as someone found a sticker of Gides alongside other characters, all listed as the Land of Tar. The sticker sheet was from a company called Denison. There were no Google results at all for either Gides or the Land of Tar. With multiple people researching, that was where the mystery was left off, and people kind of forgot about it. But a couple of years later, it was solved. A podcast was made where they investigated the mystery, got a hold of the former art director of Denison back in the 80s, who referred them to a few potential artists, and they found the daughter of one of the artists who had passed away, and in her father's stuff was the original pencil drawings of the creatures of the land of Tar. It was never anything but those stickers. This internet mystery still appeared on lists for a while as unsolved. The only mystery left is who made the enamel pins, which is still a mystery but not as big as who is this character in this land that seems familiar but there's no record of. I have one that most people seem to not know about. Grand Duchess Anastasia was in fact killed with the rest of her family in 1918. She never escaped, and the several women throughout the 20th century claiming to be her lied. The site of the execution of the Tsar and his family was completely untouched until 1991. Excavation found only 9 of the 11 expected remains. It wasn't until 2007 that 2 further sets of remains were found a small distance away from the previous grave sites. DNA testing found that one of the sets of the remains belonged to Tsarevich Alexei, and the other to one of his sisters. With this find, it proved conclusively that the entire imperial family was in fact executed and buried in 1918. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.